take your seats, and thank you for being on time. So Jonas will be continuing with the last bit of his presentation this morning. We promised you to showcase the template. It was getting a little bit tight, the schedule, so we put it in this afternoon, so you're all super awake and aware now for the templates. Very exciting, Jonas. Before that, we have a few important announcements. So 2 p.m. starts Belgium and Japan. Don't worry, where are the supporters in the room? Also, I feel a little bit not a super nice host, because we did not mention something that is right now happening in Montreal. You know, ICAO has been forever here in Montreal. We love the city. And here in Montreal right now, something very special is happening, which is the Montreal Jazz Festival. And I wanted to bring that to your attention, because some of you might be the first time you come to town. This is a big event. I'm not saying an event. It's a big event. It happens every year. And they have the best jazz players from all over the world. It's not far from ICAO. You cannot miss the CORSIA seminar by no means. But at night, when you go back to your hotel, if instead of just going to eat something somewhere, just go there to the festival. There's some food. There is places to eat inside the area. So basically, the Jazz Festival is like this. There is 4 streets in one sense, 4 streets in another sense, around what we call Place des Arts, which is the place where you have all the theaters, etc. And they close those streets for pedestrians. You know, if you have at least a notion of the street St. Catherine, okay? Here we have our street here is Bourassa, something, Robert Bourassa, that becomes University Street, and then you cross one street that's called St. Catherine. Just go up, and then go to the right in St. Catherine, and you get to the festival. It's a little bit of a walk, but it's a good walk. And once you get there, it's free shows, beautiful shows. You know, it's I really suggest you take a look, because it's very lucky that you're all here today, tomorrow, in the middle of this jazz festival. So take your time tonight, after the reception, of course, to take a look at the festival, okay? So I feel a little bit better as a host now, because I didn't mention anything. It's a very nice festival. Okay, Jonas, now the very exciting template. Go for it.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much. And I hope everyone enjoyed the generous lunch. I did. It was very good. Thank you for that. So just a couple of words about the emissions monitoring plan template as promised during the morning. So there was a question, and that was a very relevant question about the template and what is the method for the operator to submit the emissions monitoring plan to the state. It is completely up to the state to decide the format of the emissions monitoring plan. The only thing is that the emissions monitoring plan needs to include the information that is being described in the Annex 16, Volume 4. So Appendix 4 of the SARPs includes the mandatory requirements for the emissions monitoring plan, and those are the contents of the emissions monitoring plan that need to be there. However, having said that, in order to assist and make it easier to implement the CORSIA, ICAO has produced a template for the emissions monitoring plan. This will be included in the ETM, in the Environmental Technical Manual, as an attachment to that document. So the status of the template is a guidance material. It's not mandatory. The state or operator doesn't need to use this template, but they are more than welcomed to use the template if they so wish. So here you can see the contents page of the emissions monitoring plan template. You will recall that there are 4 main elements in the emissions monitoring plan, and the template is really following these 4 main elements. So as you can see, it starts with the emissions monitoring plan versions. This is very simple Excel spreadsheet of the version control when it comes to the emissions monitoring plan. Here we have included some very preliminary indicative information. This is not the real emissions monitoring plan. This is just for illustrative purposes. But as we are in 2018, this would obviously be the first emissions monitoring plan for the operator, because this is really the year when they start drafting the monitoring plans. And here on this sheet, the operator would collect information regarding the version control of the emissions monitoring plan. The first main sheet of the emissions monitoring plan and the main contents was the airplane operator identification and description of activities. So as you remember from the presentation here, the operator will identify itself. We have used a very imaginary name, A1 Airways, that is located in state A on Airport Road 1 in Airport City. But you get the idea. The operator fills in the fields that are marked in blue in the template, and for this sheet, the operator includes information to identify the operator. There is also information about the legal representative inside of the operator. The next part is quite crucial. So this is the information or the method to identify the international flights for that operator. So as you can remember from the presentation, it is important that all international flights are being covered by the monitoring requirements. And this is the section in the emissions monitoring plan where the operator selects the option to attribute flights to that operator. So from the drop-down menu, you can see there are choices. There's ICAO document 8585, which includes the ICAO designators. So this is the first option. Then there's also registration marks. So if the operator doesn't have an ICAO designator, it can use the registration mark of the airplane to identify the international flights for that operator. What I want to highlight here is that the template will include some automatic functionalities. So for example, here we will select the ICAO document 8585, and all the information and the fields from the template will gray out that are not needed for the purposes of this emissions monitoring plan, because these are 2 different options that the airplane operator can choose from. So either ICAO designators or then the registration marks. And if I choose registration marks, obviously the field requesting information on ICAO designator will gray out. So the template will include certain automatic functionalities. We will continue with our imaginary example of this airline. It has an ICAO designator. It's called ABC, and the operator will type the ICAO designator here. The template also asks information about the AOC, so Air Operator Certificate. Here the operator can very simply just tick yes or no. If it's been selected yes, the template will request additional information about the AOC. There's also fields regarding the ownership structure of the company. So as was presented this morning, the operator in certain circumstances can report together with subsidiaries. And here is the opportunity for the operator to describe the ownership structure and possible parent subsidiary structures. So if yes is being clicked, the template will request more information. And again, if we tick no, we can just skip this part and continue to description of airplane operators' activities. Here, the operator will describe very briefly what are its operations, what kind of flights it is performing. This information is really for the state to gain understanding of the operator that the state is going to administer. What is to be expected with this operator. Very important part is the last field in this section, and this is the contact details of the focal point, of the CORSIA focal point in the operator. So here, the operator will identify that individual who is in charge of communicating with the state when it comes to CORSIA-related matters. The next main part or section of the emissions monitoring plan was fleet and operations data. So in this section, the operator will file in a fleet declaration. So very simply, ICAO type designators for the airplane that the operator is using, the fuel types, and also the number of airplanes. So here we have filled in some illustrative information how this fleet declaration could look like in a specific case. This section also requests information about additional airplane types, details and procedures for determining monitoring methods for additional airplane types. So in principle, if there are new airplanes and new airplane types being introduced in the operator's fleet, how the operator will monitor CO2 emissions from these airplanes. Also, the operator needs to describe changes in the fleet and fuel. This is supplementary information to what I just mentioned. The operator needs to describe how the completeness of the fleet will be ensured. So, meaning that all the flights from all the airplanes operated by that operator will be captured in the monitoring. The operator will also provide a provisional list of state pairs that are being operated by that operator at the time of submission of this monitoring plan. So here we have an imaginary list of state pairs operated by this operator. You will see this list later on once we provide a demonstration about the CERT tool, which is the estimation tool for CO2 emissions. So we have included the same states here just to be consistent with this CERT demonstration. And lastly, the operator, in this section, the operator will describe how it determines international flight for CORSIA purposes. So the definition of international flight in CORSIA might differ from some other definitions of international flights. So here the operator will reconfirm that it has understood correctly the definition of international flights, and also how to determine the international flights with offsetting requirements. So as I mentioned during the presentation, two sets of applicability: the applicability for monitoring, reporting, and verification, and the applicability for offsetting requirements. And this is the field where the operator describes how it will identify those flights that fall under offsetting requirements. And also, lastly, the operator will describe how the exempted operations will be exempted from the monitoring of CO2 emissions, so humanitarian, medical, and firefighting operations, for example. The next section is important section because this is about the selection of CO2 monitoring methods for that operator. So as you remember, there's either a choice to use the ICAO CERT tool or then the 5 fuel monitoring methods. And how to determine an appropriate fuel monitoring method, it will be based on the threshold of CO2 emissions. So the level of activity for that operator determines whether it's eligible to use the CERT for compliance purposes or whether it needs to use one of the 5 fuel monitoring methods. Here again, it's a selection. So if we select fuel use monitoring methods, the template will request additional information regarding the method that is being selected. If we use ICAO CORSIA CERT tool, the fields regarding fuel use monitoring methods will gray out, and the tool will request additional information on how to use, how the operator is planning to use the CERT tool. Important detail here is the estimation of CO2 emissions. So as you remember, there is a threshold for the eligibility to use CERT, and in order to support the usage of the CERT tool, the operator needs to estimate its CO2 emissions. So for example, in our case, the operator has estimated that its CO2 emissions are slightly above 43,000 tons of CO2 in year 2019. And this would mean that the operator is well below the threshold of 500,000 tons of CO2 emissions from all international flights. So this operator would be eligible to use the ICAO CORSIA CERT. Here the operator describes how it has come up with this estimation. So there are a few different ways of estimating the CO2 emissions. You can either use the ICAO CORSIA CERT directly, as was described in the presentation, or the operator can estimate its fuel use and then calculate the estimated CO2 emissions from the fuel use. But in this example, we can see that the operator has used the ICAO CORSIA CERT tool to estimate the 2019 CO2 emissions. Let's select the CERT as a monitoring method. The template will ask lots of additional information in a case when one of the 5 fuel use monitoring methods is being used. So you will see there is one spreadsheet for each of the 5 methods. These spreadsheets request information from the operator, confirming that the operator has understood the respective fuel use monitoring method correctly. So here, the operator would describe what are the measurement points for my fuel use monitoring method. This is more like an oversight tool for the state. The state needs to confirm that the operator has correctly understood the fuel use monitoring method. One operator doesn't need to fill in all of these spreadsheets. As you remember, there's a choice of one of the fuel use monitoring methods. So the operator doesn't need to describe all 5 fuel monitoring methods in the monitoring plan. The operator will only describe those methods that the operator will use in practice, which makes sense. For the CERT, you will see in our case, the operator has selected to use the CERT, and the operator is eligible to use the CERT for the monitoring. So the template is very simple when it comes to description of the uses of CERT. There will be 2 ways of using the CERT. Either the operator can use great circle distance input or block hour input method, but compared to the fuel use monitoring methods, there are not too many details to be described when it comes to the CERT. The last main section of the monitoring plan is about data management, data flow, data control, and risk analysis. And this is the section in the monitoring plan where the operator describes how the CO2 related information will be handled, who is responsible to handle that information, what are the secondary sources of information in cases there are missing information or data gaps in the monitored information, how these data gaps will be handled, what are the appropriate methods to find secondary sources of information in these cases. Also, the operator will describe its record-keeping plan, so where the operator stores all the records with respect of CO2 emissions, whether there are IT systems or similar. And also the operator is invited to elaborate of the risks that are involved in the record keeping plan and in the data management systems. The last field is quite important indeed. This is the field where the operator will describe how it will communicate changes in the emissions monitoring plan to the state. So in the nature and following the idea of a communicative process in developing the emissions monitoring plan and submitting revisions to the emissions monitoring plan, this is the field where the operator will identify how it will communicate with the state when it comes to the emissions monitoring plan for CORSIA. So that was the very quick demonstration of the emissions monitoring plan template. As said, this template will be available on ICAO's website, most likely in the course of July. We are still undergoing the final editorial reviews for the template, so it's not there yet, but will be published as a part of the ETM in due course. Yeah, that's it for the demonstration. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but if not, please come and see me, and I can reply or try to answer to your questions regarding to this template.
So, thank you so much, Jonas. If you have a quick question, let's do that. Otherwise, we will proceed for the next presentation. We okay? Okay. If you have any doubts, let me explain that again. In the beginning of the seminar, I introduced you to all the staff from environment. There are not too many, but they are very good. So use your time while you're here. Ask them questions. Ask them to help you, to clarify the doubts. Don't go home with the doubts. That's not a good use of your time. So they are very good. They're here. They'll be happy to help, right? Tops. So we are good. So Jonas, thank you so much. And, you can ask Jonas as well. Okay, so we are going to move to our next presentation. So we are going to talk about CERT. And we'll have more demonstrations. So I don't think I have introduced Matthias, though. So this is Matthias Grossman. You can ask him questions, too. Okay, important announcements. Remember, we said we would be trying to put the presentations on the web as we would go along. You already have a few of them on the ICAO website, so you can tick this one. If you want to check, the presentations are there, right? Neil, CERT?
CERT.
Go for it.
So you've heard this acronym quite a few times today, and now we'll give you some more details. This is going to be a double act between Matthias and I. I'll do a kind of two-staged presentation where I go into the overview of CERT and then provide some brief details on what the tool looks like and so on. And then Matthias will actually open up the tool and go through some live examples. Okay, so the purpose of this session is to introduce CERT, and CERT has been developed in order to facilitate the implementation of CORSIA SARBs. Its aim is to support aeroplane operators in assessing whether or not an aeroplane operator is in the applicability scope of the MRV requirements, as we heard Jonas describe this morning and just before I start up here. Assessing the eligibility to use CERT in support of their emissions monitoring plans, filling any CO2 emissions data gaps, and fulfilling their monitoring and reporting requirements by populating standard emissions monitoring plan templates. So, what is CERT? In very simple terms, CERT is an ICAO tool to help airplane operators estimate and report their international aviation emissions. as an aeroplane operator, you might ask why you should use CERT. What's the value of CERT to you? Well, we've said this a number of times, but the CORSIA SARPs request that aeroplane operators to monitor and record their fuel use from international flights to determine their annual CO2 emissions. And this must be done in according with eligible monitoring methods approved by the states where airlines are registered. So in a simple way, the process includes the following actors. So of course, aeroplane operators, states, ICAO, operators report to their states, and of course states report to ICAO. We've heard this already today. Well, the CERT has been developed by ICAO to support aeroplane operators with this monitoring of their international aviation emissions. It's designed to simplify compliance with the monitoring and reporting requirements of CORSIA. So building upon this theme, another question that you would likely ask is whether all aeroplane operators can use CERT. Well, the answer to this is actually small operators, medium operators, and large operators can all use CERT to different degrees. They can all use CERT for a preliminary assessment of CO2 emissions. But some aeroplane operators can use CERT for CO2 estimation and reporting. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail on that next. This table shows that detail and who can use CERT and for what. So I'll try and summarize it, if I may. So this table highlights the type of use that an airplane operator will have access to depending on their annual CO2 emissions. Okay? There are three different ranges shown here. Below 10,000 tons of CO2, between 10,000 tons of CO2 and 500,000 tons of CO2, and above 500,000 tons of CO2. And you can see that there are different functions and uses depending on the amount of CO2. So, any aeroplane operator can use CERT for a preliminary CO2 assessment, with no restrictions in terms of its annual CO2 emissions. But the CO2 emissions and reporting function for CERT is only available to aeroplane operators with international CO2 emissions between 10,000 and 500,000 tons of CO2 per annum for the period of 2019 to 2020. Finally, the use of CERT for filling data gaps is accessible to all aeroplane operators up to a certain number of flights. It's actually 5% in the first instance on total CO2 emissions in this time period shown here, and then 5% on emissions offset between 2021 and 2035. So going a bit more into how CERT actually works. Well, CERT is a detailed tool, but is simple in its execution. In fact, it requires three key inputs: an airplane type, an origin, a destination, and we'll refer to these throughout this presentation as the input. But these are the three key inputs that CERT requires. So I'll build it up in terms of how CERT actually works, and then Matthias will jump in and give a very excellent example on using CERT. So I'll start off slowly here. So in order to illustrate how easy CERT is to use, the process is shown here. The user inputs the airplane type, the origin, and the destination into CERT. You also need to input actually the number of flights, of course, and the tool will automatically estimate the CO2 emissions, generating an output referred to as the report. And we'll go into some detail of that in a moment. So, building upon this simple process in a bit more detail, as I said, the user provides flight information. You'll see some familiar origins and destinations here from Jonas's presentation. They specify these origins and destinations based on the ICAO location indicators available in ICAO Doc 7910. I'm sure all of you are familiar with 7910. And by indicating the airplane type based on the aircraft type designator in ICAO Doc 8643. The CERT allows the entry for also for batches of flights. So you don't need to input all the flights by hand. You can upload large quantities of flights at the same time. But whichever way you do it, the information is then uploaded into, processed by the tool itself. And then the CERT returns the very important information of the CO2 emissions on a route-based basis, and depicting, again, these routes that I just showed to you. However, the report provided back to the user summarizes the information on a state-by-state basis by summing all these CO2 emissions between two states together in order to support the emissions monitoring plan and report. So that's a basic overview of what CERT is. And now I think actually at this point, just based on that simple information, maybe I'll just see if there's any comments or questions, any uncertainties on what CERT actually is before I then show you CERT and Matthias gives you the example. Any questions and concerns? Great. So it's all very clear. So now what I'll do is I'll actually show you CERT itself, and I'll talk about the development of the functionalities moving forward. So CERT will not stand still as a tool. It will develop over time. This will reflect evolving requirements from the implementation of CORSIA, increased data coverage of aircraft types and geographic areas, and improvement in fuel efficiency observed from data collection. And it's important to point out at this point that CERT is only as strong as the data submitted by our ICAO member states to develop it. And so actually, when you look at Annex 16, Volume 4 in Appendix 3, there is a request of ICAO member states to submit data, fuel burn data, origin and destination data, into the CERT development process in the future to make CERT even better than it is today. So each release of the tool is only valid for a given reporting year, and we'll have up to four functionalities, starting with the 2018 version that we will release coming up to the end of July. The 2018 version was approved by the Council during the adoption of Annex 16 Volume 4 last week. The 2019 version will then follow for CERT aeroplane operators eligible to use simplified procedures, and will be able to comply with monitoring and reporting requirements. And then finally, from 2021, all versions of CERT will include the list of state pairs subject to offsetting requirements. So CERT will develop as we move forward. So now, building upon how CERT actually works, as I've indicated, CERT has some. You don't need lots of information to run CERT, but running it is a three-step process. So the first step consists of entering the aeroplane operator's information. The second step allows to estimate CO2 emissions based on the flight data that you'll provide into CERT. And the last step is on emissions, the emissions report and the generation of the emissions report. So I'll show you each one of these. And don't worry, Matthias will show you each one of these steps in some greater detail by inputting some numbers in a moment. So we'll look at each step right now. And as it's the first time that I'm showing you CERT, I should point out that the first time you'll see CERT is here on the left-hand side of this screen. This is the first screenshot. So the information for aeroplane operators based on Annex 16 Volume 4, Appendix 4, and detail from the emissions monitoring plan, as just highlighted by Jonas, will be inputted into this section. And I'll show you each one at a time, but I won't ponder too much on this because you've really already seen it with Jonas. So of course, CERT requests the name of the aeroplane operator and the address of the aeroplane operator. It then requires the aircraft identification, so then you can carry out the attribution that I described to you this morning, whether it's flight to operator or operator to state. also the input of the air operator certificate and the responsible entity under that air operator certificate. Step 2, and perhaps a little more interesting than the administrative details, would be the calculation of the CO2 emissions. So we'll just show you a bit of an example here right now. I should point out that the green sections highlighted here are for the input by the operator, and the blue is the calculation by CERT. So we can populate the green area, and you can see we've picked ICAO aircraft type designator and airports and origins that are familiar to you. You've just seen them with Jonas. We've said that there are 100 flights per city pair. CERT would then be used to calculate, first of all, the Great Circle distance, the CO2 emissions in tons of CO2, and very importantly, whether that flight is subject to the applicability of, or under the scope of the applicability of CORSIA. Now, as you can see here, they're all under the scope of the applicability of CORSIA, apart from one, which is an internal domestic US flight between New York and New Orleans. So CERT will tell you if you input a domestic flight too. So once you've done the calculation, and you can do it in either batch form by uploading information directly or inputting it by hand, you can then generate your emissions report. So this, first of all, the information that we would have inputted at the beginning, the administrative information of airplane operator name and relevant authorities and issues of a type designator and registration marks and AOC, will all be carried through to the end of CERT, so you don't need to resubmit the information twice. Then, in terms of summarizing the information that's gone before, you can see here that based on the information we put in terms of calculation based on aircraft type, number of flights, and city pairs, now we have a total number of CO2 emissions at the end of CERT and a summary in terms of state pairs. So that's a brief summary of CERT. I've now showed you the tool for the first time. But what are the real benefits of CERT? Well, I hope you'll see that it's easy to use. You'll see it's even easier when Matthias stands here to give you a live demo. It simplifies CO2 emissions tasks for all users, including operators and states. It's an ICAO approved tool. The Council approved it last week, along with Annex 16, Volume 4. And it will be available free of charge. And it will be available free of charge on the ICAO CORSIA website for download leading up to the end of this month. Okay, so at this point, I'll pause for if there are any further questions, and then Matthias will take over and give the live demo. So any burning questions?
Fabio Nicolai from Italy. Just a question. Thank you for your excellent presentation. The system take into account different kind of engine that aircraft could have.
You mean on aircraft type?
Yes, but the type should have different engines.
Well, so insert, and I think Matthias, you can jump in here. We have 186 aircraft type. The what's called the CEMs underpin the CO2 estimation methodologies that underpin CERT. They're strictly developed using an operational data set. So we don't divide between specific engine types on the aircraft, but we do have multiple aircraft types, and we do have a wide coverage. When CERT is made available, you will also see the full methodology used to develop CERT, which includes, as I said, the development of CEMs using real operational data, using our carbon calculator, using mass equivalence, including requests for further data from the states to make CERT even better. Okay. Any more? Yep.
Good afternoon. Livas Mabaso from South Africa. Just want to check, is the assumption that the flights will be operated from registered aerodromes? Because there I'm just trying to check the system, whether it has captured all the possible aerodromes where the aircraft will be flying from, because otherwise then it will not, it might have some challenges calculating, in putting the calculations. And another question is, if a flight has a stopover in another state, so does it mean now that particular flight they will have to put in the first point of departure, then the stopover, then they go and put from the stopover to the final destination? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'll do it in reverse if you don't mind. So the stopover flights, this is a flight-by-flight tool. So you should input an origin and a destination to get the CO2 emissions out. So it's a flight-by-flight tool. In terms of the aerodrome, well, we rely on ICAO Doc 7910. We do recognize that ICAO 7910 can't quite keep up to date with all the developments in terms of aerodromes. And so there is the ability in CERT to input latitudes and longitudes for aerodromes that might not be included in 7910. That gives you the ability to calculate the great circle distance between aerodrome types. So rest assured, if it's not in there, and the vast majority are in there, but if it's not in there, then you can put in the information yourself. Okay. So with that, Matthias will take over and show you CERT in a demonstration. Thanks, Matthias.
Okay, so thank you, Neil. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthias Grossman, and I'm pleased to animate the live demonstration of the CERT. So the purpose of this demo is to give you a complete overview on how the CERT works, and also to highlight all the functionality that were not covered during the presentation. So let's start the CERT. So when you start the CERT for the first time, you need to activate the macro. So to do so, you just have to press the Enable Content button, and that's it. Perfect. So this is the main page of the ICAO CORSIA CERT. From this page, you will be able to find all the information related to the tool that will help you to answer questions such as, what is the CERT, who can use it, for which purpose, and how to use it. Also, if you scroll down a little bit, you will find the list of all the references embedded into the tool, such as the ICAO Doc 7910 for airports, Doc 8585 for airlines, Doc 8643 for aircraft type, and so on. One more thing that I would like to highlight on this page is the email address dedicated to this CERT, so the cert@icao.int. If you need assistance, or if you want to share feedback, you can contact us directly via this email address. So let's move to the step one. As mentioned during the presentation, CERT comprises a three-step process. First, you need to provide information about the aeroplane operators. Then you can estimate the CO2 emission based on the flight data provided. And finally, you can generate an emission report. And on the screen, you can see how the form dedicated to the identification of the aeroplane operators looks like. And in fact, this is the exact same form that was presented by my colleague Jonas Lokia just half an hour ago. So I will skip that step. However, I would like just to highlight that I've pre-filled the form with the information of our famous airlines, which is A1 Airways, registered in state A with the ICAO designator ABC. So let's jump to step 2. And here we are. So this is the most interesting part of the tool. Let me first give you a quick overview of the interface itself. So the interface is divided into 2 sections, a green section for the input and a blue section for the output. For the input section, help on how to fill out the form can be found by hovering over title column with the mouse pointer, and automatically, as you can see, a tooltip will appear. For example, the tooltip for the origin column indicates that the entry has to be an ICAO airport code according to Doc 7910. So now that the interface has been presented, let's see how we can use it in order to estimate CO2 emission. To estimate CO2 emission, we need to import traffic data. And to do so, we have 3 options. We can fill out the form manually, we can copy-paste the data, or we can import a CSV file containing our traffic data. So to fill out the form manually, it's pretty easy. You just have to select the aircraft type from the drop-down menu. So for instance, an A320. Flying from, we can take the first one, so AGF, which is an airport located in Solomon Island, for your information, to, let's select AYBK, which is in Papua New Guinea, and let's assume 50 flights. Another way to fill out this form is just to simply type into the cell. For instance, AT72 for the ATR 72, flying from CYUL Montreal to KMSY New Orleans, and let's assume 100 flights. Then the next step is to press the Calculate CO2 emission button, and if desired, you can check if the code entered is part of the tool, and if it's not the case, as Neil just mentioned, you can add custom airport or custom aircraft. So let's press yes, et voila, that's it. It's easy like this. Automatically, the tool managed to calculate the great circle distance for the airport pair, for both airport pair, and estimate the total CO2 emission. Plus, automatically the tool indicates if flights are subject to the scope of applicability of CORSIA, which is the case for both, because both flights are operated on international routes. So this is the first way to import the data. The second option consists to copy-paste, and for that, I will open another Excel spreadsheet, and I will give you a quick introduction of the data set. So let's imagine I have an airline based in Switzerland, and I'm operating 2 daily round-trip flights, one between Geneva and Madrid, and a second between Geneva and London City. And here you have the detail of my 4 daily flights, so Geneva, Madrid, Madrid, Geneva, Geneva, London City, and London City, Geneva, for the 1st of January 2018, but also for the 2nd, for the 3rd, and so on, up to the end of this year. So let's copy the data set into the CERT. And let's, again, calculate our CO2 emission. Let's run the check. And now we get a warning message. 1,460 records don't have data for number of flights. Would you like to set it to 1? So in the previous example, my flights were aggregated on a route-based basis. And this is why I needed to indicate the number of flights. But for that particular example, each row represents a unique flight. So by definition, we don't need to indicate the number of flights because it will be 1. And the CERT is smart enough to understand this kind of approach, and this is why we can automatically populate the number of flight column with a series of 1. And that's it. Automatically, the number of flight column have been populated, and then the tool managed to calculate the great circle distance and the CO2 emissions. So the final option consists to import a CSV file, and again, I will open first my data set. Okay. One thing to keep in mind with that option is you have to respect the format of the data. And by format, I mean the first column has to be the date, the second column, the flight ID, then the aircraft type, the origin, the destination, and the number of flight. Even if the two first columns are optional, you have to provide the empty column, like, for instance, you can see for my specific example. So this is the unique constraint with that method. So let's close the CSV file. And let's press the import input file button. I just have to find the file. And that's it. Again, really easy. You just have then to press the calculate CO2 emission button, and automatically everything has been calculated. So before to move to the third and last step, I would like to highlight a great functionality of the tool. If you're like me and if you don't know by heart all of those aircraft or airport code, I think this is a good add-on to this tool. So we have included a search aircraft and airport functionality. So you just have to press one of those two black buttons, and from this interface, you can search aircraft type either by aircraft type designator or by aircraft model. And same for the airports. You can search airports either by airport code or by airport name. So for instance, let's imagine we need to know the code associated to the 777-200LR, and automatically the tool will return the correct code, which is B77L. And same for the airports. We can select also the airport directly from the drop-down menu. So let's, for instance, select the ANR Robinson Airport. Et voilà, the code associated to that airport is TTCP, which is an airport in Trinidad Tobago, and we get also the coordinate of this particular airport. So let's go back to our previous step, and let's move to, so now that our missions have been properly estimated, we can now move to the final step and generate the summary assessment. And again, it's really easy. We just have to press the Generate Summary Assessment button, press yes, and automatically the report has been populated. So let me give you a quick overview of this report. So the report is divided into 3 sections. The first section gives you a summary of the aeroplane operator's information provided at step 1. The second section returns the total annual estimated CO2 emission for international flight, but also for domestic for your information. And the CERT also indicates if you are under the scope of applicability of CORSIA and if you are eligible to use the CERT as monitoring method. And for that particular example, the answer is yes for both. Yes, as an operator, I'm under the scope of applicability of CORSIA because my emissions are above 10,000 tons of CO2 per year, and I'm eligible to use the CERT as a monitoring method because my emissions are between 10,000 and 500,000 tons of CO2 per year. And finally, the last sections give you the CO2 emission by state pair. For instance, you get the total CO2 emission between Brazil, UAE, Cuba, Mexico, Fiji, Vanuatu, and so on. So from this interface, you can review your summary assessment, and if you're happy with it, you can generate a copy of this assessment, and automatically, just a second, here we go, a PDF will be created and will include a timestamp. So in conclusion, the key message to keep in mind is how easy to use the CERT is. It required only 3 pieces of information to estimate CO2 emission: an aircraft, an origin, and a destination. Then, with a single click, you can generate a complete emission report, and that is the beauty of the CERT. So on this note, thank you very much for your attention.
So, few announcement, halftime, Japan, Belgium, no. Someone is happy. Now, the CERT will be available, we intend to have it available on the website by the end of the month. But as of tomorrow, we have an ICAO booth outside. What we'll have, we will have our staff there at any point if you want to pass by and try it yourself. We will have the computer there so you can try it yourself, just to have a touch and see how it works as an initial look at it, I would say. So if you want to do that, just to try it, we'll make it available at the booth so that you can try with our demo, okay? Questions on the CERT? That is so good. So everybody understood everything? Love CERT, levers. I'll make a T-shirt. I love CERT.
Thanks, it's Livers again. Perhaps, I don't know if it will be a question of time. It will be interesting if they could demonstrate using an airport which is not on the system. Because that's, I guess, it's what some of the states, the challenge some of the states might encounter in practice.
Okay, we can do it now. Can you, Matthias?
Sure, I can.
So he can.
Okay, so for instance, if I type in AAA, I will get this message. So what you have to do is to press to yes, and let's say, let's put a good one, 10 flight. So when you calculate, when you press the calculate CO2 emission button, you have this pop-up windows. So if you press yes, automatically the tool will highlight that one airport enter are not included on the CERT airport database. And then if you press OK, here you can add the information related to that new airport. So we can enter AAA airport. So for the latitude, I'm sorry, I will put really random number. So let's say 10 latitude now. So you have also the possibility to enter degree and decimal or degree, minute, and second. So this is really up to you. And then you can select an appropriate ICAO member state, and that's it. So just have to then press the CO2 emission button, press again the CO2, and it's done. So based on the new information, on the new coordinate, the tool managed to calculate the distance between this new airport and Montreal.
Was that your question?
Yes. So perhaps then a follow-up. Does then it stores that information, or then the information need to be provided to ICAO somehow for it to be stored on the system?
Sorry.
I don't think I understood your question. It's going to be stored by the state when the operator. So when the operator does that, then it will be reporting to the state. And when the state reports that to ICAO, we are going to get a more aggregated number, right? I don't know.
Maybe I can clarify my question. I mean, with regard to the missing information of the airport, because then you needed to input it manually. So after that, then is the information automatically stored, or the information of that airport? Is it automatically now stored in the system, or there is a different process to have the airport included in the system?
So I'll give you my understanding. Guys, correct me if it's not that. My understanding is you will not be able to store anything yourself in the system. The system is there. You are a user. The way to have this airport included is this airport has to be part of DOC 8. If this airport is not officially in that ICAO document, and there is a process for that to happen, we cannot include that, store that in the system, because for us, that's something that's still on the works in ICAO. The way the tool works is there is airport codes. Those codes are attached. There is a process for that, and then they made their way through DOC, whatever. And then if it's in that DOC, it's in the tool. If it's not in that DOC, it's not in the tool. However, you can manually do it. If you do it once, you can just do in your Excel sheet. You know, there is ways and ways of entering the data. So if you do it once, in your Excel sheet, you can just replicate and just send it then to the tool. I think that would be the most. Okay, but I think what I take from your question, Levers, is that maybe and only maybe we should take a look on how that document is being updated, and if there is need to update that document more frequently, if it is the case that many airports are not showing in the document. That will be something for us to follow up and take action if needed. Okay? Interesting question. Anything else? I think people want coffee. And it's a good time for a coffee break. So we take Bombardier's... I have one more question. Guys, bear with us. There is one more question. Sir?
Thank you very much, and sorry to delay you from the coffee break. But I have just a small question about, I'm worried about training. Do your section planning to have any CBT training? Because such kind of tools, it is good in CBT training. This is number one. Number two, are the regulation, the new Annex Volume 4, accommodating such odd cases like diversion from domestic flight to international flight and such cases?
You want to answer the second one?
No, go.
Then I'll go for the training.
So the second question, I mean, it's a good question of clarification. I mean, the tool, as we already said, is a route-based tool. So it's only as good as what you put into it. So if you put a domestic flight into it, you get a domestic flight out. And as CORSIA is based on the result of operations, not pre-operations. If you have a divergence from a current operating plan, that means an international flight turns into a domestic flight, then in reality it is a domestic flight. So then it wouldn't be included anyway, and vice versa. So if you had a domestic flight that then turned into an international flight in CORSIA, that would be included because it's a results-based system, and CERT simply reflects that.
So, in your first question, I'll take that CBT is computer-based training. Okay, just to make sure we are talking about the same thing. No, we did not think about a computer-based training. What we really thought about is tutorials. And tomorrow when we talk about capacity building, we are already going to show you that we already have some tutorials available on the web. But our intention is, once CORSIA is available, to have a full tutorial with it. So you can train yourself. You will click, you have the video, we will explain how to do it, and you can train. We can do some exercises, so it's an online tutorial. And I think that we could call that computer-based training in some ways, but we want to make it as self-learning as possible, because it's not difficult. It's just, you just have to know how to. Of course, if we have just a tool there and no information on how to use, it's really useless. So we are, it will come with the tool, this tutorial we call. So that's the way we see moving forward. But thank you for your question. I said one more, I'll have to go ahead.
Okay, my question is...
Identify yourself.
Oh yeah, my name is Guido Harling. I said...
You change places,
yeah, I changed
right?
Places. The question is, can CERT also be used by the CAA to report to calculate on behalf or in parallel to the aircraft operator? And second part of the question is, do you envision a future version of CERT to be used for communicating to ICAO, so the state communicating to ICAO, or is there another tool planned for that?
So you have it will be more for the registry, but of course, as we go automating our systems, we'll see what the future brings. But the communication part would be more at that stage through the registries that we are putting together. Can it be used by a state? Can be used by everybody. A state can decide to use that to check any point. You can use to check one entry only. You can use to check, to repeat and check. Up to you. The tool is the tool. The beauty of the tool, and I don't know if that was said bluntly, is that imagine if you have a method or something, you have to do if someone uses a different tool, you have to do the verification of the methodology itself as well, right? You have to check if the method is right. The tool is a pre-approved method already by the ICAO Council. So if you use that, you are correct. So the only thing that you are going to check is not the method, is the entry. You can have an error in entering data. That can happen. But that's the verification that you have to have, not the method itself. So I think that's a big advance. You're using something kind of pre-approved. So it's really... all that effort, and it was a crazy effort to put that together. Let me recognize a few of the people that were also helping us in that effort. I have Philippe that's sitting here. Philippe participates in the work of the CAPE from the US side. He dedicated hours and hours together in preparing CERT. There's a lot of people involved. It was not just Secretariat. And we had to do that in a record time. And I think we have something with very good quality. We are going now to use that widely. If we see anything, we can quickly respond. But we are pretty secure on the quality of the tool. Okay? On that note, we need coffee. So, coffee. 2-0 to Japan. Wow. That was quick. I see smiles on this side of the room. Okay, coffee is kindly sponsored to us this afternoon by Bombardier. Thank you, Bombardier. We really need that coffee right now. Thank you. Enjoy your coffee.